Now to important news, important development. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he was moved to the intensive care unit yesterday after his condition worsened. It was just 11 days ago when the 55-year-old tweeted a video message saying he was experiencing mild symptoms and was self-isolating after testing positive for coronavirus. On Sunday, the Prime Minister's office said he was still battling symptoms and was taken to the hospital, insisting it was just a precaution. Now comes the news that he's in the ICU. His aides insist this, too, is just a precaution in case he needs a ventilator. Sky News reports the Prime Minister had trouble breathing and was given oxygen before he was moved to the ICU. We're told he remains conscious, but has asked that Foreign Minister Dominic Raab step in, quote, where necessary. Let's bring in NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons from London with the very latest. Keir?
Well, Mika, a senior member of the government here in the UK, assuring people in an interview this morning that Boris Johnson is not on a ventilator. He is still in intensive care in the hospital behind me there, and that member of the government having to reassure people that they will update the public on the condition of the Prime Minister if anything changes. Just to show you some of the front pages here in the UK, some just giving people the news straight. It is, after all, bad enough. Johnson in intensive care after virus symptoms worse. Others more dramatic. The Daily Mail, stricken Boris taken to intensive care, and talking about the agony for his pregnant fiancée. The Sun, Boris in intensive care, and saying that doctors are prepared to ventilate him if necessary. Mika, just to give you a picture of how stunning this feels. We're standing in front of the hospital. If you just look in that way, a short distance, that's Westminster Bridge. That's the House of Parliament. That's the Commons, where Boris Johnson has held court for months as the Prime Minister. Just, frankly, hard to take in that he is now just across the river here, fighting for his life, frankly, although we are only being given limited information about exactly how he is doing. Friends, people who've worked with him tell me that he is fit, that he's not a smoker, that they have in the past gone running with him. So people are hopeful, but, you know, we keep talking about testing and we can't talk about it enough. And it really says something, doesn't it, about the crisis in testing on this side of the pond, that in Downing Street, was able to be infected, that there weren't tests to try to ensure that that didn't happen. And just another piece of news on testing, a senior advisor to the British government here telling one newspaper that it will be at least a month before antibody tests are ready that might be able to test for antibodies in the millions, and that's the case around the world. So it's not, well, it's kind of a split screen, isn't it? The crisis right now with the man who is supposed to be leading the UK through this fight against coronavirus in his own personal fight now in the hospital behind me there, and the ongoing crisis to try and get a grip on this, particularly through trying to actually test the population so that we can step past these lockdowns.
So, Keir, we've heard some skepticism from those reporting around this, that this is even as, well, not even worse than it seems. He apparently hasn't spoken to his first Secretary of State since Saturday. He hasn't been in contact with other people in the cabinet since Saturday. Some rightly speculating that things certainly may seem worse than right now Tim Downing is letting on. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it is the case that the Foreign Secretary, who currently is stepping in for Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab, effectively kind of admitted in a news conference over the weekend that he hadn't spoken to Boris Johnson since Saturday. And I think we've got some sound of him that we can just briefly play, and you just have to look at his face, just at how stunned he is. To take a listen.
Government's business will continue, and the Prime Minister is in safe hands with a brilliant team at St Thomas's Hospital, and the focus of the government will continue to be on making sure, at the Prime Minister's direction, all the plans for making sure that we can defeat coronavirus and pull the country through this challenge will be taken forward.
I think, Joe, the honest answer is that we just don't know about the condition of the Prime Minister, and that might not simply be that we aren't being given information, but that what we know about this virus, and now we're seeing it played out with the leader of Britain, what we know about this virus is that it can take sudden turns, that it is unpredictable. So, you know, people around the world praying for him, including political opponents, effectively. Macron of France tweeting his good wishes. The two of them, of course, having done battle over Brexit over a sustained period, but politics pushed aside at this stage.
It is terrible news, and he's certainly in our prayers. NBC's Keir Simmons, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.
And, Katty, there is definitely the question about transparency during this time. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so some journalists have said that they weren't really given the full picture they felt over the course of the weekend when they were being told that Boris Johnson was still very determined that he was going to be running things in the country, and then that they were allegations that appeared on Monday, actually bizarrely, from Russian reporters on Monday. There were reports in the morning that Boris Johnson was needing a ventilator, and Downing Street said that those were disinformation, dismissed those reports as disinformation. It may well be that the Russians were sowing disinformation as well, and it could be a very bad coincidence of timing. But then just a few hours later, Downing Street had to make this announcement that Boris Johnson was being moved into intensive care. My understanding is that during the course of Monday, he was getting worse, not better, and that he was being moved into the intensive care unit in order to have access to a ventilator. He'd had oxygen during the course of the day on Monday. He started to get worse. They moved him into intensive care. Now, you have to remember, 15% of COVID cases in the UK end up in hospital and need oxygen. So that's already putting Boris Johnson in the only 15% bracket. It's only 5% who end up in intensive care and need ventilators. So he's really at the extreme end of this illness at the moment. We don't know whether he's going to get that ventilator, when he's going to need it. And of course, it's the Prime Minister. They're going to take extra precautions, right? They may not move somebody else into ICU in his position, but it is the Prime Minister, so they're going to do everything they can.
Katty, thank you. Willie?
On Sunday night, we were told that it was just as a precaution. And Ed, I think a lot of people said, wait a minute, the Prime Minister of the UK, one of the most powerful men in the world, they don't just casually drop him into the hospital unless it's serious. So what are you hearing about his condition and his prognosis from your sources there in the UK?
Well, I'm quite good friends with members of Boris's family, siblings of Boris, and one of them, Leo, his middle brother, texted last night that he's strong as an ox, and they're pretty confident he'll pull through. He is a very robust. He might not be slim, he might not be, as fit as some people, but he's an extremely durable model. Let's put it that way. The sort of element here, Boris is a classicist. He's a Greek and Latin classicist. The element here of potential Greek tragedy, can't be overlooked. He did, as his government did, maintain a stance of herd immunity for many, many weeks. He went out there, and by his own admission, he was very happily going around hospitals, as a politician does, he said, shaking hands with people, and would continue to do so, and then very tragically got struck down by this. What Katty was saying about Downing Street's communication of his condition is, I think, quite significant. They were saying he was fully in charge, carrying out normal ministerial duties until last night, when in fact, as we see, Dominic Raab, his de facto number 2, hadn't spoken to him since Saturday. So clearly there is some skepticism about what Downing Street are telling us. And hopefully Katty is right, and others are right, in saying that he's been moved in to an ICU and given oxygen preemptively, rather than because he's in a critical condition. But I think a lot of people are worrying that it is worse than that. I have to say, though, from hearing from Boris's family, they give him pretty high marks in terms of his robustness.
Well, so Ed and Caddy, can you all briefly tell us about Dominic Raab, the man who, for all practical purposes, is running the British government right now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we don't have the same constitutional lineup that you do here in the US. You know, unfortunately, in a position like this, where it's very clear what the line of succession is. So it was the Prime Minister who appointed Dominic Raab effectively to deputise for him. He is a guy who had been involved heavily in the Brexit negotiations. He's very much on the Brexit side of Boris Johnson's political wing of the family. Currently he's the Foreign Secretary for the UK. He's, as you saw in that clip, I think, has nothing of the energy and the charisma of Boris Johnson. He wasn't a particularly successful Brexit secretary. There were a whole series of Brexit secretaries. He had a short stint as one and wasn't particularly successful as a Brexit secretary during his time. And if it's not clear exactly what happens now, because there are some people in the UK calling for a government of national unity, suggesting that actually all of the political parties, the Labour Party has a new leader, Keir Starmer, and maybe that there should be, at this moment of crisis, if the Prime Minister were to stay incapacitated for a while, a rethink of how this succession process works.
Ed?
Well, as somebody humorously put it yesterday, it was a stroke of genius by Boris to make Dominic Raab his number 2, because now the entire nation, including Boris's political foes, are rooting for him to recover as quickly as possible.
Oh my God!
Dominic Raab was a disastrous Brexit secretary.
I was trying
he's
to be
got
diplomatic
very little
here.
experience. You were doing a wonderful job, Cathy. I admire it. As an opinion journalist, I feel less constrained. He's considered to be a very, very hardline figure, not an emotionally high EQ politician. Maybe he'll grow into a bigger role, and maybe I'm being a little bit uncharitable. But I think, you know, Boris, whether he deserves it or not, I would argue not, but Boris has very, very high opinion ratings. He is liked, even though he might not be particularly trusted. He is liked. He's a likable Prime Minister. And Dominic Raab is not cut from the same cloth.
Yes. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.